Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, Rob. How are you doing?
Good morning, Nasser. Good morning, listeners. How are you, Nasser?
We're rocking and rolling, brother. Another week in lockdown, along with all our listeners all over Melbourne, all over the world dealing with COVID. But great news, we've got another exciting guest, Rob.
We do indeed. And Farah, how are you? Welcome to our program.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Nasser.
It's great to have another Palestinian woman joining us. Now, Farah, a question we always ask our new resources, our new guests to Palestine Remembered, is their Palestine story. Why don't you take us through how you got to Australia and your Palestine story?
Okay. So obviously, in order to tell my Palestine story, I probably need to go back to the time when my grandfather migrated from Palestine to Kuwait in the early 1950s.
So he migrated? So he wasn't part of Nakba?
Well, see, this is a huge part of the narrative that we're always in a position where we need to defend. Now, he migrated to Kuwait on like economic migration. So a lot of people think that the refugee crisis was just manifested in a way where people were, fleeing from their homes, which was obviously the case, especially in 48 Palestine. But I come from a town which is just outside Jenin called Arab. So it wasn't affected in the same way that 48 Palestine was affected, but it was, people were in massive economic, there was almost an economic depression in that time. And, people were not finding jobs and life was becoming really, really difficult. So it was a different side of the refugee crisis that a lot of people don't really know about. Many people understand the side of the refugee crisis that was created in 1948 from the stories of people fleeing their homes and houses and towns and villages being burnt, which is really what happened. But that mainly affected what is currently we refer to as 48 Palestine. But if you look at the West Bank at the time, it was a different kind of crisis. There was a massive economic crisis. People were not able to find jobs. The economic situation was really, really dire. And this is why a lot of Palestinians, I consider more as forced migration because the situation was very difficult to handle in the West Bank. So I come from a town just outside of Jenin called Arab. And so this is the reason why my grandfather had to leave, because he had siblings and a family to support, and the life in Kuwait was looking promising at the time. So this is about 3 or 4 years after the Nakba. So he migrated to Kuwait, and he started working in the aviation industry. And then my father was born in Kuwait. So I'm, second generation born in Kuwait. So my father was born in Kuwait, and my father grew up in Kuwait, and he had a very unique upbringing from a Palestinian perspective, in that the Palestinians in Kuwait have a very unique situation in comparison to the rest of the Palestinians in the Middle East, in which they enjoyed a great deal of political freedom. There was something close to about 500,000 Palestinians in Kuwait till about 1990, when the Gulf War erupted. So Palestinians in Kuwait made up around 1/6 of the population in Kuwait. And, they were very, very significant community clusters. They were very much involved. I mean, my dad went to a Palestinian school for almost 9 years in Kuwait, which was administered by the PLO. And, they would sing the Palestinian national anthem, and they would sing Palestinian nationalist, songs. And, they really lived that Palestinian experience that they were craving, that they left when they were forced to leave from Palestine. Mm-hmm. So the reason why this is very significant is because it affected, when I was born in Kuwait, it affected the way that I grew up as well with my Palestinian identity. Now, in between, my father studied in the U.S. and he was politically active in the U.S. Him and my mom lived there for a couple of years, and my dad was involved in Palestinian youth activities all over the U.S. So when I was born in a country where Palestinian nationalism was embraced, and I was born in an environment where I grew up not hiding my identity, and I grew up embracing my identity. And I don't remember a day where I ever had to hide my identity. Now, later on in life, I discovered that, other Palestinians had it very differently, and I had it very, very difficult. So born in Kuwait, raised in Kuwait, and I attended an American school in Kuwait. And then I came to Australia. First came to Australia in 1995. Migrated with my family.
So not 1991. Everybody, the post-hug Kuwaiti exodus.
No. I stayed. I remember the war vividly. Yeah. We stayed because my dad worked at the Ministry of Electricity and Water. He's a mechanical engineer, so he had a lot of work to do during the war. So I remember the war very, very vividly. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing the troops. I remember seeing, the smoke from the refineries from afar. I was quite young, but I do remember it very well. So we stayed in Kuwait throughout the entire war, after the liberation. And then we migrated to Australia in 1995, and we lived here for about 3 years, and then went back to Kuwait, and finished school there. Once I finished school, came back again to Australia, and I did my bachelor's and my first master's here. Then went back to Kuwait again, and I worked at the university there. And then the third time moving back to Australia was about 7 years ago, when I came back and I gave birth to my son here. And then we've been settled here since then.
Fantastic. So I want to get to your research in a second, but just very quickly. So yes. Your grandfather leaves the West Bank early 50s. Yes. 67 happens. Does he get back?
No.
No. So he never got back?
Never got back. When he left Palestine, he thought that he was going to be gone for a couple of years, just to really just save up some money, go back,
get everybody married.
Yeah, this was the dream. And to be honest, even though they built a home and a community in Kuwait, it was very difficult at the beginning because culturally and socially, Kuwait was very different from Palestine. Yeah. I mean, even looking at the environment around them, they were used to, lush green and 4 unique seasons. It was a massive shock for my grandfather when he migrated to Kuwait. But the atrocity just kept getting worse and worse, and the hope of coming back to Palestine started diminishing by the day. They accepted the fate that they had to settle down and create a community in Kuwait.
Tragedy, as many Palestinians have suffered. Now, Farah, continuing the long tradition of Palestinians over-exceeding everybody else's expectations, you're currently in your PhD, in the final
That's right.
Final parts of your PhD. Just as a summary, you're studying feminist organizations within the Palestinian movement with a focus on neoliberalism, capitalism, and NGOs.
Yep.
So what,
that's a mouthful.
It's
a
long line of tradition of, super Palestinian women.
Yeah, that's right.
Why don't you give us the executive summary first and then branch off into it?
Yeah, that's right. So I've always been interested in, from a professional point of view, I've always been interested in the way people behave in organizations, and I teach organizational behavior at uni here, and at the same time, I've always been obviously very passionate about Palestine, and I've wanted to include Palestine into my research project. And this research project came out of another research project that I was also doing on Palestinian Australians, and I noticed that the female voice was missing, and the female voice was understated. So the more I researched on, women in Palestine, the more I noticed that, feminist organizations in Palestine have such a rich history, and they really do need to be studied, and they need to be understood, especially in my field, which is management and organizational studies. So, it took me a while to kind of come to what exactly that I wanted to research. And the final research question, let's say, is kind of broken up into a couple of parts. But very briefly, I wanted to map out the development of the Palestinian feminist movement, which, Palestinian women have been organizing in Palestine since the late 1800s, but they didn't formally organize till about 1929. But the movement itself and the organizations that became part of that movement evolved over time, and their evolution is significant to understanding Palestinian modern politics. So the research question that I'm really looking at is, taking into consideration the historical mapping of the Palestinian feminist movement, what are the dynamics when considering the transnational community, when considering transnational feminism, and when considering the political economy? Because after the Oslo Accords, there was a massive shift in the Palestinian feminist space, in which a lot of the organizations became what we know as NGOized, in which a lot of the grassroots voluntary organizations, like the ones, for example, that orchestrated the first Intifada, became professionalized, institutionalized, capital driven, and a lot of the organizations became very much dependent on foreign aid. So this has been happening for the past 25 years, yet it's never been studied in my field. So I wanted to bring that understanding to my field and to put Palestine on the map in the field of management and organizations, and that kind of very briefly sums up the a very, very complex topic that I'm studying.
Because it's so easy for the Orientalist white supremacist mind
Yep.
to use the Islamified imagery of an oppressed woman, but it's a simple narrative to dismiss us. Whereas the reality, particularly in Palestine, the women in fact lead.
Yep.
And perhaps what
do you give
us?
The strongest women on earth. What they have to do with leading the families and leading all of these different places. People obviously have no idea how strong the Palestinian women are.
Yeah. And it's strong, resourceful. So in that perspective, Farah, and I'll get to the next question will be, obviously as a PhD, you need to be challenging a thought process and give us a unique perspective on anything that's been published previously. But a couple of stories of some unique personal feminist heroes, the Palestinian heroes that our audience might not have heard of, that you've uncovered in your research.
It's really funny that the Palestinian feminist heroes that I've uncovered in my research are actually everyday heroes. They're like, in my opinion, they are women who work, who volunteer, who are politically active, who are, politically engaged, and are not afraid to do that, despite the way that sometimes society stifles their thought, and the occupation does as well. So this tenacity and this, persistence of women that I spoke to, who are leaders of local Palestinian organizations, are to me what are the definition of a modern Palestinian hero looks like. I mean, there are so many examples in history, but I think I would want to, focus on the everyday heroes that I spoke to.
Okay. So let's give some context to an everyday hero. You and I know what that means, but for our audience.
Yep. So the women that I spoke to are all organizational leaders within Palestine. Some have been organizing, for the past 40 years, and some of them are quite young, even younger than myself. And they've faced a lot of challenges and threats, and being blackmailed, and being the stories I heard were absolutely insane. Being blackmailed by other members of society, being on watch monitors from the occupying forces, threatened to have their house demolished, being humiliated at checkpoints just because they're going to attend a meeting that they've scheduled for weeks, and the sheer humiliation of having to go through that, whereas other feminist activists in other countries like Australia, for example, enjoy different kinds of privileges. So for a woman to undergo that pressure, and some of them are extremely underpaid. Some of them are, volunteers. Some of them have, 2, 3, 4 kids. Some of them have been, their sons have been martyred, but they've insisted to go on and to continue that message. For me, that is the definition of a Palestinian feminist hero who is resilient to the destructive environment that's around her, and will not give up despite the continuous obstruction.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And these were the women that I spoke to.
Yeah, I just reiterate that. I mean, I've met a lot of Palestinian women, and you don't see any as strong, but who can empathize and worry about the other people around them rather than themselves, which to me is another strength that they have to get credit for.
Yeah. So, thanks, Rob. In your research, then, Farah,
yeah.
What have you uncovered that is unique? Well, you're charged with a responsibility to advance the body of knowledge of the world with a PhD. Right.
Yeah.
What's unique in your research?
Well, the first unique aspect is the fact that within my research in the field of management and organizational studies, and specifically from a post-colonial perspective, a lot of the research on Palestine has been overlooked, and there are so many political reasons why this, what I refer to as academic asphyxiation has taken place, because, Palestine has been largely dismissed. So the inclusion of Palestine itself is a massive move within the field, because if you look at the field, Palestine is rarely studied. So that's one of the first things. And the second thing is that there is no understanding of the Palestinian feminist space within our field, even though Palestine, I make a huge argument in the thesis saying that Palestine should not be contextualized, should not be homogenized with other Arab or Middle Eastern or post-colonial context, because Palestine itself has its own unique attributes. So that from the inclusion of Palestine, that's a big thing in the field, because it is largely missing. Now, the second thing is, and this stems from the fact that there's no understanding of how Palestinian women organize in Palestine, is that because of the last 25 years, and because of the way in which Palestinian feminist organizations have dramatically shifted, and they've completely changed from the way that they used to run, around the time of the Intifada. What we now see, and this is something that hasn't been uncovered in other research, and I probably should be waiting until my thesis is in publication, but one of the things that I've uncovered is that there are signs within Palestine, within the Palestinian feminist space, that women are organizing alternatively. So there's dissent, there's dissatisfaction, and there's deviance from the ways in which Palestinian feminist organizations have been organizing for the past 25 years, which are very much Eurocentric, imposed management styles.
Yep.
So the ways in which Palestinian women have been organizing is pretty much dictated by they're donors, and they're pretty much dictated by foreign power. It's a soft power that has been understated, but I haven't come across anything in the field that says that there's actually signs that women are organizing differently. They're becoming a lot more politicized. They're going back to the old ways. They're reverting back to the old ways of organizing, in which women were sustainable. Women were volunteering. Women were not, they were not doing activism as a job. They were doing activism as, something that they are extremely passionate about. So this is huge, because if you look at the field, nobody had studied this before, because this is literally very recent that we've seen, signs. We don't know if it's a phenomenon yet. This is something that I want to monitor over the next couple of years. But the women, especially the younger women that are taking to the streets and demonstrating, they're sick and tired of being run as NGOs that are, fully or partially dependent on foreign aid. They want to take matters in their own hands. They want to take control of their discourse. They want to repoliticize a movement which has been depoliticized for the last 25 years. And this is moving women more and more and more away from liberation. And then you see women now acting and saying, you know what, we are tired of being controlled by foreign powers. We want to take things in our own hands. And this has not been uncovered yet in the literature.
Wow. Is there any particular reason or thing that you can put your finger on why it hasn't been studied before?
Why it hasn't been studied before? Because it's pretty recent. Like the new, they're not organizations, they're not registered organizations, but the new coalitions and the new movements have literally just emerged in the last 2 years. So there hasn't been enough time for them to be studied, because, as you know, with academic publications, they're heavily scrutinized. So it takes a couple of years to publish. But from my research in the field, nobody has spoken about the ways in which women are now organizing alternatively. And the main reason is, the reason I'm arguing is that it really is just relatively recent. But there are obviously, historical reasons, the dependency on capital and the inability to be sustainable, because unfortunately, a lot of these foreign powers and the foreign donors, which are really, really big organizations, they've created kind of a competition within Palestine, a competitiveness about activism. I put this in quotes, activism jobs. So, a lot of the women just find that they have no choice but to accept these jobs. Yeah. But so there are several, there are really, really complex reasons as to why this hasn't been studied yet and why this is, really significant. But it's showing you what could potentially be a massive turn in Palestinian feminist organizing.
One of the challenges, Farah, is that, as you said, NGO money comes with, it's conditioned, yeah? Conditioned. It comes with strings, and we know recently the EU has imposed even more strings on a number of NGOs in Palestine.
Yeah.
To make sure that the work that's getting done is getting done by people that are approved, and the work that's getting done is approved work. And the work is framed not in a context of settler colonial nature or on a decolonization process or anti-occupation, but rather on conflict resolution, peace building.
Yep. And peace building and state building, which we all know is
perpetuation of the current
failure.
situation.
Failure of the Oslo Accords. We know that 25 years later it's proven to be a failure. But another really big problem, and this is something that I highlight in my research as well, is that there's a massive disconnect between these foreign large NGOs, when they donate money to Palestinian feminist organizations and other organizations in civil society. Not only is the money conditioned, but the entire discourse has completely changed from being liberation driven to being project driven, cycles of projects. Women in Palestine are becoming more and more disconnected from their communities. They feel like that these foreign NGOs come and impose certain managerial practices on them, yet they don't even understand the local feminisms. They don't understand the local knowledge, and they don't even understand the local context, which has developed and evolved over the last 70, 80 years, well before, not even 80, more than 80 years, well before the Nakba. So Palestinian women have a very rich history of organizing and orchestrating, so many significant historical events. But then you have these foreign NGOs that come in and pour money, and they even dictate that there are certain projects and certain issues and topics that they want to address that, to be honest, are not even a priority for Palestinians.
Yeah.
So, Palestinians are stuck in a trap trying to navigate themselves between, trying to be politically engaged, but at the same time, their voices and their ideas are marginalized and stifled.
Yeah. Is there any of your work deal with some intersectionality between Indigenous feminist struggles here in Australia and the Palestinian women?
No, that would be definitely something that I would consider in the future, because
Postdoc.
Yeah, that would be probably postdoc. The Palestinian, look, the beauty of studying Palestinian feminism particularly, and especially from a post-colonial, settler colonial perspective, is that Palestine itself is very central, it should be very centralized in post-colonial studies. So what comes out of this study is something that we can definitely apply to understanding, indigenous, feminist movements and organizations here in Australia and other settler colonial states. So the idea is to bridge that connection, that Palestine is that central tenant that brings about all different kinds of settler colonial experiences. But unfortunately, given the complexity of the project in itself, I mean, I had a massive understanding of Palestinian history from the moment that I could speak. I always thought that I had an understanding of Palestinian history until I started this project, and it turns out that what I know is a drop in the ocean. So the topic itself is complex enough, but this is definitely an extension of the project that I wish to work on in the future.
Has
Yes.
any of your work brought into Patrick Wolf? I don't know if you ever had the chance to meet the late Patrick Wolf, but he was a fantastic supporter of ours and did a lot of work on decolonization and settler colonialism.
Yes, I am aware of his work, but no, unfortunately,
okay.
It wasn't used in this research project. But this research project opens doors for so many other projects. So this is definitely something to keep in mind.
Well, we've got 2 minutes left. Give us one great story. Share a good story from your interviews and research.
I think one of the ones that really left, and there's so many, but one of the ones that really left an impact on me is a woman who started an organization on the outskirts of Jenin, and she runs an organization in a rundown, really neglected 200-year-old Ottoman-style home, and she insisted to carry on the message of her son who was martyred in the Battle of Jenin. And I love this story so much because it shows how much men can be positively involved in feminist activity in Palestine. So it was actually her son's idea to start a feminist organization to support rural women. And she started, it's about 20 years old now, and she started it, in honor of her son. And I think that is such an amazing example.
Farah, thanks so very much for being on the show. By being on the show and being a PhD student, you're now inducted into our honorary Hall of International Resources. So we'll call upon you again in the future, inshallah.
Definitely. A certificate on its way.
We'll send you one of our certificates.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, fantastic, Farah. Good luck with the rest of your year, and we look forward to hearing that you successfully defended your PhD.
Excellent. Thank you, Nasser, and thank you, Rob.
No worries. Thank you.
And that was Farah from Sydney. And I'm sure, listeners, you joined Robert and I on the online forum on Wednesday, where Free Palestine Melbourne had a forum on annexation featuring Diana Butu, Dr. Yara Harawi, and Mehan Maghrabi. It was a fantastic 1.5 hour presentation, a really great facilitated Q&A from Mel, who was with us last week. If you did miss it, go to Free Palestine Melbourne's Facebook page. Just put Free Palestine Melbourne. Make sure you download it and watch it. It really is well worth watching. Be sure to join Rob and I next week. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, free Palestine.